Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, September 4th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about the 2022 House elections as of today. Heading into these November midterm elections, we have been expecting since the very beginning, and I mean it quite literally, since November 7th, 2020, when Joe Biden was declared the President of the United States, or the victor of the 2020 presidential election, we knew from that moment onward that the 2022 House elections would be predetermined to go to the GOP. Now looking at the map, the Republican Party still very much maintains a very large advantage over the Democrats. They have a 76% chance today at winning control of the House from the Democratic Party. Now, considering where our House map currently stands, the Democratic Party holds the narrowest majority of the 21st century. Democrats hold exactly a 5-seat majority, 4 above the required amount, in order to retain House control. That amount is so insignificant in comparison to what Republicans have won in the past. In 2010, in the last time we've seen a red wave year in the House elections, we saw it in 2014, but by that point, Republicans had already controlled the House. But in 2010, the Republican Party picked up 63 seats from the Democratic Party. This year, Republicans only need 5. So, keeping that all together and taking into consideration, the House should be a foregone conclusion at this point, or so we thought. And that's how I've been addressing it for quite literally 2 years. Now, I'm a bit more apprehensive. To reiterate, I think the Republican Party still wins control of the House of Representatives, but the fact that Democrats have about a 1 in 4 chance of victory here is quite astonishing. We can actually see the trajectory of this over time and see that it actually has changed over the past couple of months. On June 1st, when the forecast was initially starting up and calculating numbers, Democrats had just a 14% chance at victory. That's about 1 in 8. Heading over to now, to going to about 1 in 4, well, it's a super significant uptick from where it was before. 14% versus 24%, things that are a 1/4 chance happen all the time. But that's not to say Republicans still won't maintain or still won't win control of the House of Representatives. But this comes as a pretty consistent trend line that has shown the Republican Party lose its advantage over the Democrats, nationally speaking, to the extent that really doesn't show the best results for the GOP. I think looking at the results from the past few elections and looking at it in comparison to the generic ballot, I also think that we should assume that based off of where we are in terms of national figures between Democrats and Republicans win control of the House. In 2010, the Democratic Party only won 4 seats more than the required amount needed for a majority, and in the polls, they were up by 7.3. In 2018, the Democratic Party won 235 seats, which is impressive, but certainly not to the extent that we would say is the largest Democratic majority we have seen in the 21st century. We saw that in 2008, which was then conquered by the Republicans in 2010. It was a 250-plus seat majority, an advantage for the Democrats. That resorted down to about 190 seats by the end of the 2010 midterms. In 2018, Democrats won the generic ballot nationally by 8 points. They were up in the polls by 9 points on average, and yet the House majority there was only 235 to, I believe, 435 seats, to 190. Looking at the 2022 numbers now, the Democrats are certainly underperforming from where they were, but this is actually the better result for the Democratic Party than what might have been 2 months ago. As I have mentioned in many of my videos, the Republican Party has maintained a very consistent lead over the Democrats for about 9 consecutive months. From November 2021 through July 2020, or even early August 2022, the Republicans have led the national generic ballot. And it came as a result of President Biden's disapproval rating starting to overcome the approve around August. And this is where you saw a very big shift in the generic ballot and our national environment. Because for the first time in a long time, President Biden was disapproved of. Little did we know that it would continue on until about now. Now, the Democratic Party today stands at a better point, and their best point, actually, that they have experienced in quite some time. The last time Democrats were around this point, I believe, was around this time frame when they were up by 42.9%, April 2022. But beyond that, I mean, you are talking about going back all the way to around this time frame, March of 2022, when you saw a consistent 42.7% approve average. But the point is, actually, that the disapprove and approve have started to narrow down on each other. When you look at the numbers from, let's say, July 25th, 2022, the disapprove was leading the approve by about 20 points nationwide. That is now about to narrow down to just single digits. So the Democrats in the House elections are probably much more happier that the president of the United States is no longer disapproved of to the extent that he was previously. And I think that's the main driving factor as to why Democrats are now doing better. I also think that if you look at the comparing Senate elections that are to occur the same ballot, you will find that the Democratic Party has absolutely turned this election around by an epic proportion. Because looking at the expectations on June 1st, 2022, Republicans had about a 60% chance at winning control of the Senate. They very clearly established favorites. Because similarly to the House of Representatives, this is the narrowest Senate majority for either political party during the entirety of the 21st century. So to keep that in mind, a 50-50, the narrowest it can be in United States politics. Republicans only need 1 seat. For contrast, 2010 they won by context. In 2010 they won about 6 to 7 seats. In 2014 they picked up 9 seats. I mean, the GOP did phenomenal in past red wave years. But this time, they are actually not the favorites, and they only needed to win just 1 singular seat. It's quite fascinating, if you ask me. But it definitely turned around. It went from being a foregone conclusion that the Senate was going to go to the GOP to the Democrats now being the very clearly established favorites. Now, I don't think that's going to happen for our House elections. I think the GOP still rides this out into the midterms. Again, House elections also are just so much more easier to win than statewide elections, especially when Democrats have top-tier candidates in many of their races. Republicans, on the other hand, don't necessarily have that. The House elections are a very similar story, but what I will say is that House elections are much better indicators of a pushback against the president of the United States. In 2018, Republicans might have picked up 2 Senate seats, but that wasn't to say 2018 was a red wave year. It was just a very fortunate map for the Republican Party, and quite frankly, Democrats did very well given the circumstance that they were in, but they didn't end up picking up seats. Republicans, in fact, did, but that didn't change the narrative of what that year was. It was a pushback on President Trump, and the generic ballot reflected that. There were just individual Senate seats. The Democrats no longer were able to win because of hyperpartisanship. North Dakota, Indiana, Missouri, states that had voted for President Trump by double digits, sometimes up to 30 points in the election 2 years prior. So to imagine Democrats winning there wasn't super easy. But looking at the House elections in 2022 and 2018, these are going to be where you really see the American public push back against President Biden. It's no secret that he is disapproved of across the nation, but the Democratic Party's performance in the House doesn't always correlate with what we've seen with President Biden. Because President Biden right now is disapproved of by 10 points nationwide. At the time where he was disapproved of by about 20 points nationwide, you will find that the generic ballot was never more than a point in favor of the Republican Party and is now a point in favor of the Democratic Party. It's fascinating to see how far off you see the approval rating and the generic ballot because, quite frankly, voters don't seem to be taking in Biden's approval rating to the extent that they might have in another election. Because it seems as if there was one major factor that has changed the trajectory of these midterm elections, and yes, it is Roe versus Wade, it is Dobbs v. Jackson, it is the Supreme Court's intervention in a woman's right to choose that has allowed the Democratic Party to change the narrative of this race, because now so much more is at stake than just inflation, than just COVID-19 measures, etc., etc. All those things are traditional in our modern election, minus COVID-19, are now going to be in comparison or in conjunction with a midterm that will define the future of abortion access across the nation. And House Democrats are riding that wave to victory. And we've seen it now explicitly in the state of Alaska and explicitly in the state of New York, where you've seen multiple special elections across the country in which the Democratic Party has actually outperformed where they were when the Democrats were up 7 points nationally speaking, or outperformed where the Democrats were under President Biden, under President Trump in 2018. Some of these districts have shown some super substantial improvements for the Democratic Party, even to a point where Alaska's at-large congressional district flipped to the Democratic Party for the first time since 1972. Things like this don't exactly happen in red wave years. But I am going to continue hammering in that point that the House elections are so much more easily won than these governor elections and these Senate elections for the Republican Party. These districts are smaller. They're much more willing to be voting against the President of the United States. And I will say that candidate quality probably matters the least when it comes down to a congressional district election. Because even some of the more competitive, swingy districts still elect hyperpartisans, whether Democrats or Republicans. But on statewide levels, when you approach this up to a swing state that might be still as competitive as more of these individual congressional districts, you still find that candidate quality matters a lot more on that level for a variety of reasons. But ones that we don't really need to get into within this video, but just understand understand that on a general basis, historically, and just what we can expect for 2022, candidate quality does not really matter as much when it comes down to congressional elections, because this is the first line of defense for the incumbent party, and typically it's the first to break. Looking also at beyond the 538 forecast, it's not just them that are saying Republicans are the favorites to win control of the House. Race to the White House gives the Republican Party about a 2/3 chance at victory here, which is still pretty substantial. It also, again, isn't just these forecasts, it's also expert ratings. The Cook Political Report gives Republicans 213 seats, the Democrats get just 190. Larry Sabato's crystal ball gives Republicans 216 seats, Democrats 192. Inside Elections gives Republicans 211 seats, Democrats at 204. Remember which party is the incumbent party that currently maintains control? It's the Democrats. So to see them behind in every single forecast, in every single expert rating, something is telling us here that the GOP is still ahead by a very large amount. 538, if you were to apply it based off of their non-toss-up seats, Republicans would be in fact the favorites and the expected winners of the majority. That's why the forecast gives them a 3/4 chance of victory. Fox News, their power rankings here give Republicans 220 seats, Democrats just 187. And Election Daily 2022, they give Republicans 218 seats, Democrats 193. So no matter where you look, Democrat source, Republican source, nonpartisan source, news source, political source, forecast, whatever it might be, the Democratic Party is behind in the House elections, and that hasn't changed too dramatically. I will say that Democrats being at a 1-in-4 chance does not mean it is a foregone conclusion that the GOP will win control of the House. I think that was much easier to make as an argument where Democrats were nearing down into the single-digit chances on the betting markets and other political forecasts. Democrats were hovering around 12-13% on the 538 forecast just about 2 months ago. Now the Democrats have about a 1-in-4 chance at victory, from what was even nearing 1-in-10. To go to 1-in-4 is a super substantial uptick, but again, it's simply not enough. This House map, especially after many losses by Democrats in the redistricting battles in the final steps of it, they thought they succeeded in New York. Everyone did, because it was a Democratic-controlled court. Did not happen. Kansas did not happen. Maryland did not happen. Ohio did not happen. Democrats got lucky in some, right? They got the map to be struck down in the state of North Carolina. They got their map to be chosen in the state of New Jersey. But beyond that, you didn't see too many substantial victories for the Democratic Party on the House level, at least not to the extent that would put them within reasonable standing at winning control of the House. Had they maintained New York, these chances probably would be around 1-in-3, if not higher. Had they struck down Ohio, even higher than that. Had they been able to maintain their advantages in some other states as well and not been vetoed or struck down by even their own Democratic justices like in Maryland, the chances would be higher. But that is not what is happening here on our 538 forecast or anything else, because congressional redistricting has always favored the GOP. We went into it knowing they had 100 more seats than the Democrats to congressionally redistrict, and they did effectively, and made it so this House map is entirely unwinnable for the Democratic Party, or so we thought. And as of right now, my money is on the GOP, but I will say, and I say this with, just taking everything into consideration, don't count out the Democrats just yet. We could see over the next 2 months a complete change in trajectory in the House elections, but I still think we should count on the Republican Party's victory within these seats because it is so exceptionally easy for them to do so. But that was the same exact argument we raised for the Senate and governor elections, and here they are, struggling to win those two. I think the House still goes, but we could very well see it move in a different direction depending on our national environment. If Biden seems to uptick even higher, I mean, he's on an upward trend. You look at this and you say, give him 2 more months, he might even be in the approve. And I can tell you right now, if Biden is approved of by Election Day, the Democratic Party is going to fare a lot better than they would have if he was disapproved of, or even disapproved of by the time, you're talking about July 21st through 25th. Around that time frame was one of the worst points for President Biden in the entire first 2 years of his presidency. And if that continued into November, had it continued to get worse and worse and worse for President Biden, it would be much easier to see how the GOP clean sweeps every single competitive race. But unfortunately for the Republican Party, these midterms are taking a change in tide and direction, and it's not in their favor. You can see it in the betting markets, you can see it in the expert forecasts, you can see it in the ratings. Wherever you're looking, the Democratic Party is narrowly increasing their advantage over the GOP in some races. and are starting to really claw back down the Republican Party's high chances at victory in some of these otherwise solidified elections, like the House of Representatives, Senate elections, governor elections, in which Democrats have a much more viable chance than they did just a month ago. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.